Hello, everybody. I am Mrs. Poppet, and this is my place. Welcome back for another day of story time. Today's story is called The Wild Swans, and it's going to take us 2 days to read it, but in the end, I think you'll like it very much. So how about if we get started with part 1? The Wild Swans. Far away in a land to which the swallows fly when it is winter, dwelt a king who had 11 sons and 1 daughter, named Eliza. The 11 brothers were princes. Each went to school with a star on his breast and a sword by his side. They wrote with diamond pencils and had golden slates, and learned their lessons so quickly and read so easily that everyone might know they were princes. Their sister Eliza sat on a little stool made of plate glass and had a book full of pictures which had cost as much as half of the kingdom. Oh, these children were indeed happy, but it was not to remain so always. Their father, who was the king of the country, married a very wicked queen who did not love the poor children at all. They all knew this from the very first day after the wedding. In the palace there were great festivities, and the children played at the receiving company, but instead of having, as usual, all the cakes and apples that were left, she gave them some sand in a teacup and told them to pretend it was cake. The week after, she sent little Liza into the country to a peasant and his wife, and then she told the king so many untrue things about the young princes that he gave himself no more trouble respecting them. "Go out into the world and get your own living," said the queen. "Fly like great birds who have no voice." But she could not make them ugly as she wished, for they were turned into 11 beautiful wild swans. Then, with a strange cry, they flew through the windows of the palace, over the park, into the forest beyond. It was an early morning when they passed the peasant's cottage where their sister Eliza lay asleep in her room. They hovered over the roof, twisted their long necks, and flapped their wings, but no one heard them or saw them. So they were at last obliged to fly away. High up in the clouds, over the wide world they had flew, came to a thick, dark wood, which stretched far away into the seashore. Poor little Eliza was alone in her room playing with a green leaf, for she had no other playthings, and she pierced a hole through the leaf and looked through it at the sun, and it was as if she saw her brother's clear eyes, and when the warm sun shone on her cheeks, she thought of all the kisses that had been given her. One day passed just like another. Sometimes the winds rustled through the leaves of the rose bush and would whisper to the roses, "Who can be more beautiful than you?" But the roses would shake their heads and say, "Eliza is." And when the old woman sat at the cottage door on Sundays and read her hymn book, the wind would flutter the leaves and say to the book, "Who can be more pious than you?" And the hymn book would say, "Eliza." And the roses and the hymn book spoke the truth. At 15 she returned home, but when the queen saw how beautiful she was, she became full of spite and hatred towards her. Willingly she would have turned her into a swan like her brothers, but she did not dare do so yet, because the king wished to see his daughter. Early one morning the queen went into the bathroom. It was built of marble and had great soft cushions trimmed with the most beautiful tapestry. She took 3 toads with her and kissed them and said to one, "When Eliza comes to the bath, seat yourself upon her head, that she may become as stupid as you are." Then she said to another, "Place yourself on her forehead, that she may become as ugly as you are, and that her father may not know her." "Rest on her heart," she whispered to the third. "Then she will have evil inclinations and suffer in consequence." So she put the toads in the clear water, and they turned green immediately. She next called Eliza to take a bath. As Eliza slipped her head under the water, one of the toads sat on her hair, a second on her forehead, and a third on her breast, but she did not seem to notice them. When she rose out of the water, there were 3 red poppies floating in it. Had not the creatures been venomous or been kissed by the witch, they would have been changed into red roses. In any event, they became flowers, because they had rested on Eliza's head and on her heart, and she was too good and too innocent for witchcraft to have any power over her. When the wicked queen saw this, she rubbed her face with walnut juice so that she was quite brown, and then she tangled her beautiful hair and smeared it with disgusting ointment till it was impossible to recognize the beautiful Eliza. When her father saw her, he was much shocked and declared she was not his daughter. No one but the watchdog and the swallows knew her, and they were the only poor animals, and they could say nothing. Then poor Eliza wept and thought of her 11 brothers who were all away. Sorrowfully she stole away from the palace and walked the whole day over fields and moors till she came to a great forest. She knew not in what direction to go, but she was so unhappy and longed for her brothers, who had been, like herself, driven out into the world. She was determined to seek them. She had been a short time in the woods when night came on, and she quite lost the path, so she laid herself down on soft moss, offered up her evening prayer, and leaned her head against the stump of a tree. All nature was still, and the soft mild hair fanned her forehead. The light of 100 glowworms shone amid the grass and the moss like green fire, and she touched a twig with her hand ever so lightly. The brilliant insects fell down around her like shooting stars. All night long she dreamed of her brothers. She and they were children again, playing together. She saw them writing with their diamond pencils and golden slates, while she looked at the beautiful picture book which had cost half a kingdom. They were not writing lines and letters, as they used to, but descriptions of the noble deeds they had performed, and of all they had discovered and seen. In the picture book, too, everything was living. The birds sang, the people came out of the book and spoke to Eliza and her brothers, but as the leaves turned over, they darted back again to their places, so that all might be in order. When she awoke, the sun was high in the heavens, yet she could not see him, for the lofty trees spread their branches thickly over her head. But his beams were glancing through the leaves here and there like a golden mist. There was a sweet fragrance from a fresh green verdure, and the birds almost perched upon her shoulders. She heard water rippling from a number of springs, all flowing into a lake with golden sands. Bushes grew thickly around the lake, and at one spot an opening had been made by a deer, through which Eliza went down to the water. The lake was so clear that had not the wind rustled the branches of the trees and bushes so they moved, they would have appeared painted in the depths of the lake. For every leaf was reflected on the water, whether it stood in shade or sunshine. As soon as Eliza saw her own face, she was quite terrified, and finding it so brown and ugly, but when she wetted her little hand and rubbed her eyes, and undressed and dipped herself in the fresh water, a more beautiful king's daughter could not be found anywhere in the world. As soon as she had dressed herself again and braided her long hair, she went to the bubbling spring and drank some water out of the hollow of her hand. Then she wandered far into the forest, not knowing whither she went. She thought of her brothers, and felt sure, knowing that God would not forsake her. It was God who made the wild apples grow in the wood, and who satisfied the hungry, and now he led her to one of these trees, which was so loaded with fruit that the boughs bent beneath the weight. Here she held her noonday repast, placed props under the boughs, and then went into the gloomiest depths of the forest. It was so still that she could hear the sounds of her own footsteps, as well as the rustling of every withering leaf which she crushed under her feet. Not a bird was seen, not a beam of sunbeam could penetrate through the large dark boughs of the tree. Their lofty trunks stood so close together that when she looked before her, it seemed as if they were enclosed within a trellis work. Such solitude she had never known before. The night was very dark. Not a single glowworm glittered in the moss. Sorrowfully, she laid herself down to sleep, and after a while it seemed to her as if the branches of the trees parted over her head, and the eyes of the angels looked down upon her from heaven. When she awoke in the morning, she knew not whether she had dreamed this or whether it had really been so. Then she continued her wanderings, but she had not gone many steps forward when she met an old woman with berries in her basket, who gave her a few to eat. Then Eliza asked her if she had not seen 11 princes riding through the forest. "No," replied the old woman, "but I saw yesterday 11 swans with gold crowns on their heads, swimming on the river close by." Then she led Eliza a little distance farther to a sloping bank, and at the foot of it wound a little river. The trees on its bank spread their lofty leafy branches across the water towards each other, and where the growth prevented them from meeting naturally, the roots had torn themselves away from the ground, so that the branches might mingle their foliage as they hung over the water. Eliza bade the old woman farewell, and walked by the glowing river till she reached the shore of the open sea, and there, before the young maiden's eyes, sat the glorious ocean. But not a sail appeared on the surface. Not even a boat could be seen. How was she to go farther? She noticed how the countless pebbles on the seashore had been smoothed and rounded by the action of the water. Glass, iron, stones, everything that lay there mingled together, had taken shape from the same power, and felt smooth or even smoother than her own delicate hand. "The water rolls on without weariness," she said, "till all that is hard becomes smooth, so I will be unwearied in my task. Thank you for your lessons, bright rolling waves. My heart tells me you will lead me to my dear brothers." On the foam-covered sea we laid 11 white swan feathers, which she gathered up and placed together. Drops of water lay upon them. Whether they were dewdrops or tears, no one could say. Lonely as it was on the seashore, she did not notice it, for the ever-moving sea showed more changes in a few hours than the most varying lake could produce during a whole year. If a black heavy cloud arose, it was as if the sea said, "I can look angry too." And then the wind blew and the waves turned into white foam too, and they rolled. When the wind swept, the clouds glowed with red sunlight and the sea looked like a rose leaf. But however quietly the white glassy surface rested, there was still motion on the shore, as its waves rose and fell like the breast of a sleeping child. When the sun was about to set, Eliza saw 11 white swans with golden crowns on their heads about to set, flying towards land, one behind the other like a long white ribbon. Then Eliza went down to the slope from the shore and hid herself behind the bushes. The swans alighted quite close to her and flapped their great white wings. As soon as the sun had disappeared under the water, the feathers of the swan fell off, and 11 beautiful princes, Eliza's brothers, stood near her. She uttered a loud cry, for they had changed so very much, yet she knew them immediately. She sprang into their arms and called them each by name. Then how happy the princes were at meeting their little sister again, for they recognized her, although she had grown so tall and beautiful. They laughed, they wept, and very soon understood how wickedly their mother had acted to them. "We brothers," said the eldest, "fly about as wild swans so long as the sun is in the sky, but as soon as it sinks behind the hills, we recover our human shape. Therefore we must always be near a resting place for our feet before sunset, for we should be flying towards the clouds at that time. We would sink into the sea after we dropped. We do not dwell here, but in a land just as fair that lies beyond the ocean, which we have to cross for a long distance. There is no island in our passage but upon which we could pass the night, nothing but a little rock rising out of the sea, upon which we can scarcely stand with safety.
even closely crowded together. If the sea is rough, the foam dashes over us, yet we thank God for even this little rock. We have passed whole nights upon it, or we should never have reached our beloved fatherland, for our flight across the sea occupies 2 of the longest days in the year. We have permission to visit our home once in every year, and to remain 11 days, during which we fly across the forest to look once more at the palace where our father dwells and where we were born, and at the church where our mother lies buried. Here it seems as if the very trees and bushes were related to us. The wild horses leap over the plains as we have seen them do in childhood. The charcoal burners sing the old songs to which we have danced as children. This is our fatherland, to which we are drawn by loving ties. And here we have found you, our dear little sister. 2 days longer we can remain here, then we must fly away to the beautiful land which is not our home. And how can we take you with us? We have neither ship nor boat."
"How can I break the spell?" asked their sister, and then she talked about it nearly the whole night, only slumbering for a few hours. Eliza was awakened by the rustling of the swans' wings as they soared above. Her brothers were again changed into swans, and they flew high circles, wider and wider, till they were far away. But one of them, the youngest swan, remained behind, and laid his head on his sister's lap while she stroked his wings, and they remained together the whole day. Towards evening the rest came back, and the sun went down, they resumed their natural forms.
"Tomorrow," said the brother, "we shall fly away, not to return again till a whole year has passed. But we cannot leave you here. Have you courage to go with us? My arm is strong enough to carry you through the woods, and will not all our wings be strong enough to fly with you over the sea?"
"Yes, take me with you," said Eliza.
They spent the whole night in weaving a net with pliant willows and rushes. It was very large and strong. Eliza laid herself down on the net, and when the sun rose, her brothers again became wild swans, and they took up the net with their beaks, and flew up to the clouds with their dear sister, who still slept. The sunbeams fell on her face, and therefore one of the swans soared over her head, so that his broad wings might shade her. They were far from land when Eliza woke. She thought she must be dreaming. It seemed so strange to her to feel herself being carried high in the air over the sea. By her side lay a branch full of beautiful ripe berries and a bundle of sweet roots the youngest of her brothers had gathered for her and placed by her side. She smiled her thanks to him. She knew it was the same who had hovered over her to shade her with his wings. They were now so high that a large ship beneath them looked like a white seagull skimming the waves. A great cloud floating behind them appeared like a vast mountain, and upon it Eliza saw her own shadow and those of 11 swans looking gigantic in size. Altogether it formed a more beautiful picture than she had ever seen. But as the sun rose higher and the clouds were left behind, the shadowy picture vanished away. Onward the whole day they flew through the air like a winged arrow, yet more slowly than usual, for they had their sister to carry. The weather seemed inclined to be stormy, and Eliza watched the sinking sun with great anxiety, for the little rock in the ocean was not yet in sight. It appeared to her as if the swans were making great efforts with their wings. Alas! She was the cause of their not advancing more quickly. When the sun set, they would change to men and fall into the sea and be drowned. Then she offered a prayer from her innermost heart, but still no appearance of the rock. Dark clouds came nearer. The gusts of wind told of a coming storm, while from thick, heavy masses of clouds lightning burst forth, flash after flash. The sun had reached the edge of the sea when the swans darted down so swiftly that Eliza's head trembled. She believed they were falling, but they again soared onward. That's where we're going to stop for today. It's a very exciting story, isn't it? And it's still more to come. So I think that when you come tomorrow for the last part of the story, you will find it just as exciting or more so.
Anyway, I hope you enjoyed part 1, and I look forward to sharing part 2 with you tomorrow. I'll see you then.